This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
This is a download from the BBC. I'm Grant Stott, and this is my highlight from today's show. Now, Britain has produced some of history's greatest comedy duos of all time, from the two Ronnies to Reeves and Mortimer, from French and Saunders to Fry and Laurie. Never, though, have any come close to rivalling our enduring adoration and affection for the great double act that is Eric Morecambe and Ernie Wise, whose partnership lasted from 1941 to Morecambe's death in 1984. Icons of British television in the 1970s, Eric and Ernie were, in the words of one commentator, the most illustrious and the best-loved double act that Britain has ever produced. And paying homage to these comedy greats, writer Louis Barff has just released a new book, Sunshine and Laughter, the story of Morecambe and Wise. And we're delighted that Louis could join us today to tell us more. Welcome to the afternoon show.
Hello, Grant. Hi.
Well, where do we start with this, and how much time have I got? So much I want to pick your brains about. It's a terrific book, and the thing is, you may be mistaken for thinking that, oh yeah, you know the story of Morecambe and Wise. They met as they were kids and they started out in the sort of routine, but there's so many more little nuggets that you've found. So clearly you felt there was another story to be told.
It was more of a case that my publisher said, we'd like a Morecambe and Wise book. And I said, well, hasn't it been done endlessly? And they said, well, no, we'd like to see how you do it. So it was a case of, at one point I was thinking, well, this is basically going to be a book entirely composed of footnotes. Right. And as I went on, I found things and thought, no one's mentioned that before. Like, for example, the control room, the sound control room at the Hume Hippodrome in Manchester, actually being a garden shed, which no one had mentioned before until Peter Pilbeam, the studio manager, said, it was a garden shed just on the balcony. Yeah, terrible sound separation. I just thought the idea that we were making, in the golden age of radio, they were making things in such a ramshackle and makeshift way, and the idea just appealed to me. And I thought, well, if we can get that on the public record, then we've added to the store of human knowledge.
Yeah, definitely, and it's the way that you go into detail about some of their iconic sketches, their relationships, which we'll go into in just a moment. But first and foremost, were you a fan?
Oh yeah, big fan. Yeah. I was asked recently, do I remember the first time I was aware of Morecambe and Wise? And the answer is no, because they were always there. Mm. It was just,
It was, and they were such a big part of our entertainment. I mean, I was born in 1967, so through the 70s, that was, you sat around the TV with the family and watching especially the sort of big Christmas shows as well. And it's difficult to kind of understate just how big and successful they were, especially at Christmas.
Well, it's television then was almost a captive audience. You had 3 channels and no video recorders. But despite that, the BBC and ITV they both sort of battled and made tremendous efforts to get the largest possible share of audience. And Morecambe and Wise tended to win it for the BBC. It was and also, something they latched onto in about 1970, they did a Christmas show that was an extension of their normal show, but they got a couple of guests on, and they insulted them. And then the report came back from the viewing panel saying, "Well, we liked seeing the great actors being mocked." Yeah. And so they thought, well, if we can do this in a way that isn't nasty, then we're on to something. And between them, Eddie Braben, Morecambe and Wise and Johnny Ammons, they worked it out brilliantly how to send people up. But they were always in on the joke. Mm-hmm. And that became the thing. And then after that, it became, right, who can we get for next Christmas? And, and bigger and bigger and bigger. And, they knew it would become the talking point of the Christmas. So, Angela Rippon and all of that, Andre Previn. I think the Andre Previn one is the great coup because he was the conductor of the London Symphony Orchestra, awfully, he awfully grand and, doing all the... And it was sort of, well, you'll never get him. And it turned out he was a huge fan. Yeah. Johnny Ammons went to Andre Previn and said, we'd like you to appear on the show. And he said, well, I never miss the show. I love them.
Well, it was brilliant, and it was so unusual, to have someone of his standing and stature to appear on a show like this. And this was this famous sketch, the Grieg Piano Concerto sketch, which they had done before back on ATV and the black and white days, and Eddie Braben had sort of applied his magic to it. We've got a little clip of it here, which is quite telling as well. Just at this moment, let's have a listen to that iconic clip. It still makes me laugh every time I hear it.
I don't dispute for one moment that Mr. Morecambe is a great comic.
Yes.
I find it difficult to believe that he can play the Grieg Piano Concerto.
Well, I do assure you he knows all the class. I do assure you, Mr. Privet. All the masterpieces he knows them. The Planet Suite by Gustav Holst.
Not forgetting the three-piece suite by Arthur Negus. Who was it, do you think? Now look at me when I'm talking. Oh, you are. Who was it, do you think, that introduced Glenda Jackson to Tchaikovsky?
I don't know.
Me!
Him?
Was it?
Yes,
Yeah, and if you don't believe me, you can get in touch with the other world-famous conductor, Sir Ivy Benson. He'll tell you all about me, won't he?
Certainly will.
Good night.
No.
Don't go,
Mr.
with me?
Preview. Don't go, Mr. Preview.
Privet.
I can assure you that Eric is more than capable.
Well, all right. I'll go get my baton.
Please do that.
Yes, it's in Chicago.
Ow! He's in! I like him.
And what's telling about that, and you go into detail in the book, Louis, Pow, he's in, I like him, was a bit of a line from Eric, because he wasn't entirely convinced about getting Andre Previn in the sketch. Is that right?
Well, he had huge respect for Andre Previn, but what he wasn't convinced about, Eric and Ernie loved to have a whole week's rehearsal with a guest. And Previn was so busy, he could only do 3 days. And then his mum fell ill, and he had to fly to America. And he could only do a couple of hours before they recorded it in an office at Television Centre. They just ran through it and then went straight down and recorded it. And Eric was, no, get rid of him. If he can't do the whole week, if we can't do the 3 days. And it was Johnny Ammons, the producer, said, look, if it doesn't work, we don't use it. But this man can remember all of Mahler. He's got no problem with 10 pages of dialogue. And Johnny stood up to Eric. Eric needed that sometimes. He needed someone to say, no, we're doing it. He and Ernie had a great system. If the other one didn't like an idea, they wouldn't do it.
Wow.
And Ernie said, in this instance, look, let's give it a go. We've got nothing to lose. He's here, And that moment when he says, I'll go and get my baton, it's in Chicago. Previn was a very, very funny man. He wrote a great book called No Minor Chords. It wasn't really an autobiography. It was about his time in the film studios as a young man. But it's an incredibly funny book. He's a great, funny writer, and he had comic timing. He was a jazz pianist. I think there's this link between jazz musicians and comedy, like Dudley Moore, for example, the obvious one. So I think Previn had great comic timing, and that's when you hear Eric go, right, we're in. This is going to be good.
It's a lovely moment. There's so many lovely moments in that whole sketch. But what I also took from the book is it comes quite clear just how a nervous sort of performer Eric was. If it wasn't super rehearsed, if it wasn't just so precisely done to his liking, he was quite nervous, which I was surprised.
Oh no, Eric was a ball of nervous tension. And what's interesting about Eric and Ernie is the way that they rehearsed to make it look so effortless. And all of these things that you think are just casually thrown off ad-libs, most of them were rehearsed. They could ad-lib, and if something happened, they would run with it. And particularly, one of the things I love most about Eric and Ernie, watching them, is if something goes in a certain direction and it's not planned, each of them follows the other. So if Ernie takes it off somewhere, Eric doesn't undermine him. He's straight in with it. And if Eric initiates something that's not scripted, Ernie's straight there with it. There's a beautiful moment. They're going up to the stage at the 1970 BAFTA Awards at the London Palladium, presented by David Frost. And they're up there to accept an award. And on the way up to the stage, they spot a monitor on a stand in the corner of the stage. And Eric goes as if to steal it and wheel it off. And you just see the split second where Ernie's going... He's going off left. He's going to nick the monitor. And he goes in and gets the other end of it and starts pushing it with him. And it's just, that's how in tune they were. And it was just an astonishing thing. And they just enjoyed each other. They made it, started as kids making each other laugh on train journeys between towns. And that was always what they were. And then, of course, they get up there and Frost's there. And Eric delivers one of the great ad-libs of all time. And this was when Frost was jetting back and forwards between London and New York. And Frost goes, Morecambe wise. It's more like Bruce Forsyth, really. and Eric says, so are you in New York now? It brings the house down.
But it's also that understanding, as you say, the relationship between the two of them. And what again struck me in the book was also, how they were completely, trusting of each other. What I wasn't familiar with regards to the relationship was the difficulty between their wives, which is something that
no, I think that was a passing reference in the book from someone who worked with him, who said that the wives didn't necessarily get on especially well. A couple of other people have said the same. A couple of other people have said, actually, they got on fine. And there was a long period when they did all go on holiday together and everything. I think maybe it was just a case of, wanting some space, really. So I unfortunately, when the Mail on Sunday did an extract of the book, they made this passing reference, which is about one line on page 184 or whatever, from a ventriloquist called John Boucher, who toured with them. And that was his observation. It was his perception. And, of course, the Mail on Sunday made that the headline. And it wasn't really. And sadly, the Mail on Sunday thing, I know it upset Eric's widow, which it upset me as well. So,
well, we'll not dwell on that. What we will dwell on is that wonderful relationship. But it looked tense at times on screen, but it clearly wasn't. Was with Des O'Connor. We've got this wonderful clip of the three of them, Eric and Ernie, forefront, having their usual attack at Mr. O'Connor. But unbeknownst to them, he's walking in from upstage. Have a listen.
Oh, God, if you want me to be a goner, get me an LP by Des O'Connor. Look at that face!
That's the most unusual record he's ever made.
This is one where he sings the right notes? Just the one?
Yeah. No, side 2, track 3. He sings the right note and you hear the slump of the controller as he falls over the controls.
I like that. Oh, they love it, you see? You see what I mean? Oh, thank you. Oh, yes. That's enough. We got a dozen more like that.
More like that.
A dozen more.
That is the best record Des has ever made.
You mean there's nothing on it at all? Did you hear that? Oh, where did you get it from?
Boots.
Do you need a prescription?
I got it at the poison counter.
At the poison counter. How do you do?
Have you seen that nose there? God, looks like Concord coming out the hangar for the first time. And those teeth. Like a set of white bullets at the end of a long dark tunnel, It's ridiculous. I feel ill every time. What's the matter?
I like him.
It doesn't matter how many times you hear it, you watch it, it still gets you going, doesn't it? And Des O'Connor really typified that relationship that we talked about how stars really wanted, they understood, even though they were getting the absolute Mickey ripped out of them, the value of being on their show.
See, the thing is, Des, it all started on the 1972 Christmas show, and it was a one-liner that John Junkin and Barry Cryer came up with. It was a sketch about a World War I air race. And we have good news. What is it? Has Des O'Connor lost his voice? And then it got such a laugh that they started doing more Des O'Connor jokes. But they could do that because they were mates. And also because it wouldn't have been funny if Des hadn't been talented. It wouldn't have been funny if they were actually taking the mick out of someone who was a no-hoper. Des was a huge star. Really, really good middle-of-the-road singer, sort of Perry Como-y sort of style. And also in his younger days, he had been the stand-up comedian, and of course he was the famous. Here we come, Radio Scotland. Of course, we can't do this without mentioning the Glasgow Empire.
I know the story, yeah.
And Morecambe and Wise died nightly there. British comedians died every time they liked American singers and sentimental stuff and all that. And if the audience stayed quiet, they were letting you live. And at the end of a terrible, terrible week, Eric and Ernie left the stage to the sound of their own footsteps, and the stage manager said, "They're getting to like you." And Eric said, "How?" He said, "No." But the famous one was Des. Des was having such a horrible, horrible time. And he faked a faint. He just fainted cold on stage just to get off and out. And it was horrible. And there's also the great Jimmy James story. Jimmy James, who was the comedian's comedian, the box routine. Is it you that's putting it about that I'm balmy? Even Jimmy James didn't go down well at Glasgow Empire. And it was so bad that he got through a 7-minute routine in 3.5 minutes. And he came off the stage with Roy Castle, and he was running past the next dressing room. The next act on was Slim Whitman. And Slim Whitman shouted, "Jimmy, what's going on?" And Jimmy James shouted at him, "You are!"
Well, there is clearly so much more we could talk about Eric and Ernie in the book. Yeah. The Eddie Braben relationship is fantastic as well, but we've completely and utterly run right out of time. Louis, thanks so much for joining. It's been a real treat to think back and remember. Pleasure. And it's a great audiobook as well, Louis Barth.
Yes, it is. Jonathan Stevens done a great job.
It's a great voice. All right, thanks very much indeed. Sunshine and Laughter, the story of Morecambe and Wise, is available to buy in written and, as you've just heard, it's in audio format as well. I've been jumping between the two. That was my highlight from today's show. I'm Grant Stott. Thanks for listening.